Hello students and welcome to COM4807's Assignment 2 video. My name is Professor Elmarine Greef, and although Professor Botha has already welcomed you to the module as a whole, I would like to welcome you to this assignment specifically. I'm the lecturer responsible for Assignment 2 this year, so if you have any questions that pertain to the content of Assignment 2, you're more than welcome to contact me on email or on telephone, but I kind of prefer email. Alright, so let's have a chat about Assignment 2. Now, if you selected Assignment 2 to do for this assessment period, you will see that there's various aspects in this assignment that might sound a little bit strange to the ear at first. Interpretivism, positivism, etc. Not to worry, however. These are very big words that actually don't mean something so completely outlandish as you might first think. So, how do you approach this assignment? Well, you start off by reading your tutorial letter 101 from start to finish. Once you've done that, you can focus in on the assignment specifically. Don't do the thing that many students do, where they jump ahead and just look at the assignments. That's not a very good idea, because you won't have that sort of holistic idea about the module that you actually need in order to be successful and to pitch your assignment successfully. Okay, so once you've read your tutorial letter from start to finish, you can come back to this point where you focus in on the assignment specifically. Now, if you have a look at Assignment 2, you're going to see that we give you a little bit of a small little intro and then a bigger intro after that. Then we break up the assignment into certain components that all need to feature in order for you to be successful in this assessment. So start off by reading the whole introduction, then go back to the place where we tell you what you need to do in this assignment, and only then do you focus on the specific points that need to feature in this assignment. Also, don't make the mistake of thinking that because we have the specific points listed that you need to focus on in this assignment, that means you can answer the assignment in point form. All honours assignments in organizational communication asks you to submit an essay. Okay? This means that a holistic piece of work that unpacks and discusses all of the aspects of the assessment needs to feature. There shouldn't be places where you have a bulleted list where you only just list things. All things must be discussed. There must be a line of reasoning and argumentation in your assignments. Please keep that in mind. Now, does this mean that there can't be subsections in your assignment? Of course not. Subsections, each with their own subheading, etc., is encouraged, as this helps you to structure your line of argumentation in a more sensible way. What we ask of you, however, is to make sure that each section of the assignment speaks to the one before it, as well as the one after it, and very importantly speaks to the main or holistic line of argumentation that you forward in your assignment. So that's got to be your focus throughout. Right, so now that we've got that behind us, let's move on to discussing the sources that you will need to consult for this assignment. Now, you'll see that there's a reading list in Tutorial Letter 101, but that's not an exhaustive list. That's not a list of all of the reading that you need to do for this assignment. No, it's a list to get you started, but you will still have to find your own sources, make use of them in this assignment. Professor Slubbert posted a video that I did a little while back showing you how to make use of Google Scholar and the UNISA library in order to access sources. Please have a look at that video as well if you're struggling to find sources for this assignment. For the most part, however, you will have to read on interpretivism, you will have to read on positivism, and you will have to see sources specifically that relate those two to communication or a communication context, because that's what you should be focusing on in this assignment, of course. A little bit more about that a little later on. Alright, for now, let's have a look at what your assignment actually asks of you. Right, so you'll see that this assignment focuses on this following few things. First of all, it asks about the positivists. Then it asks about the interpretivists. Now, this will be the first thing that you will focus on in this assignment. You will have to talk to positivism and interpretivism. You will have to define these two concepts. After you've done that, you can move on to actually show how these two differ from one another or how they actually relate. That will be your second point of focus. The third point of focus is when you take each one of these perspectives and relate it to a communication context specifically. Now, when you do that, you'll be focusing on number 3 for your assignment. Very importantly, however, for number 3 of your assignment is you shouldn't be focusing on any other communication context than an organizational context. Very important. Remember, your honors degree is in integrated organizational communication, and this module deals with integrated organizational communication theory. So it shouldn't be a communication context that falls outside of those bounds. Furthermore, you'll see that I have indicated over there that there needs to be an organization A and an organization B. What I mean by that is the assignment specifically asks you to make use of 2 different organizations to showcase your understanding of both positivism and interpretivism. Your first organization should be an example of how the positivistic perspective is incorporated into communication contexts. Your second organization should show how interpretivism is incorporated into communication context, organizational communication contexts. Now, of course, in any one organization, both perspectives can be present because no one organization is completely positivistic and no one organization is completely interpretivistic in its nature. However, for the purposes of this assignment, we would like you to make use of 2 different organizations so that you can really showcase to us your different understandings of these 2 perspectives that sometimes really do butt heads in a way. So that it should be 2 different organizations that feature in your assignment. Now, the organizations can be either real or imagined. You can make up an organization if you think that that will help your line of argumentation. However, it really does show a good, solid understanding if you can take the theory and apply it to a real life situation. So if I were doing my honors, I would make use of 2 real life organizations. Imagined, of course, is still appropriate. Also, of course, you can imagine scenarios within those 2 organizations if they are real. That's fine as well. All of your examples, however, have to serve the purpose of showcasing your theoretical understanding of these 2 perspectives of organizational communication. Also, I of course just quickly want to remind you that it has to be the internal communication of the organization that you deal with. So we don't really want to hear a whole lot about the advertisements of the organization or anything like that. We want you to showcase the way that interpretivism and positivism has a bearing on the internal communication of those 2 organizations that you have chosen. Now, just a quick little tip over here, 2 things. First of all, my examples are going to be of external communication because I don't want you to copy my examples in this presentation. So bear that in mind. Secondly, I might give you a little bit of a tip. If you look at specific organizations that have a certain kind of managerial style, it will give you a good indication of what kind of communication is practiced therein as well. So for example, if I were to now start thinking about the 2 organizations that I would make use of for examples in my assignment, I would choose a more positivistic managerial style as the one that would have, more often than not, also a positivistic communication style. So the police force or the army, perhaps, would be a very managerial, focused, positivistic way of organizing. So their organizational communication might also be a little bit more like that, whereas interpretivism might be a little bit more of a freer organization that doesn't have such a hierarchical managerial system. But I leave it in your hands. I know you'll pick two good organizations to showcase your understanding. Alright, so that's it about the organizations. Let's move on and now focus on each one of these 3 points that I told you pertinently need to feature in your assignment in order for it to be successful. So let's focus on point number 1. Point number 1 is the positivists. Let's look at positivism. Now, you'll see that we talk about positivism in the introduction part of your assignment as well. And what we say is that the positivists look at communication not positively, right? So don't confuse the term positivism with positive. Okay, it's not the same thing. So positivism looks at any phenomenon, including communication, in a very scientific, empirical way. What they try to do is reductionistically reduce any phenomenon to its basic components in order to understand it. Okay, so if you think about, for example, biology. Now, positivism actually sprouts out of the natural sciences, and the positivists there said that if you want to understand oxygen, you have to look at what is oxygen made up of. If you want to understand water, you have to understand what water is made up of. So they reduce and reduce and reduce water until they actually come to hydrogen and oxygen. Right? So it's the smallest components that it's made up of. Reductionistically, we focus in on all of the small parts that make up the whole, because they think, the positivists, that's how we'll actually understand this thing. If we break it up into its smallest parts and then look at those. So in terms of communication, you've been having a look at a positivistic way of understanding communication since your first year. Why do I say so? Well, because one of the first things that we learn as organizational communication scholars, or as communication scholars as a whole, is how communication looks. And we say communication is made up of a sender, a message, and a receiver, right? That's how we learn. So we've actually reductionistically been focusing on those smaller components that make up the whole of communication. Now, the positivists don't just stop there. They don't just look at the smaller components of communication, trying to make sense of what this sort of latent variable is. But they also say something different. They say that if you take those smaller components, they function almost like a machine. The one wheel turns the next wheel, which in turn turns the next wheel. And it's all very predictable as to how it functions. And because these components act like a cog in a wheel, that's why sometimes the positivistic perspective is also called the mechanistic perspective, because it looks at sort of the mechanistic parts of communication and how the one influences the other, how the one makes the other one tick. Now, taking this idea of a cog forward, the positivists also say that these parts of communication, like the parts of a machine, is interchangeable. These parts are interchangeable. So, if you take one receiver out of the equation and actually just replace it with another one, the same thing will happen, because they're interchangeable, these parts, right? We can interchange the parts and still get the same predictable outcome. So as we say in Tutorial Letter 101, positivists believe that individuals act rationally and their behavior in the organizational setting is a result of logical reasoning. Okay? So it's all very logical, mechanistic. The one thing, if you do this, then this will be the result. If you do that, that will be the result. It's all very mechanistic, all very logical. Okay, so those are the positivists. Now, here is a positivistic sort of example of communication. So, it's an advertisement for cough syrup. So the advertisement says, clear your lungs from that cough. and then it has a bottle of cough syrup there. So, if you have a cough, use our product and you'll clear your lungs from cough. Basic logic, the one thing will lead to the next thing. And they of course believe, these positivistic communication scholars, that if you put out a message to your receiver and it's a good message, then it will have a good outcome. A good message will have good return on investment for your communication because it's logical. A bad advertisement will have a bad effect. A good advertisement will have a good effect. Easy as that. Nice, clean, scientific. Okay? Now, just quickly remember that your example can't be an advertisement because you're focusing on internal organizational communication. Right, so that's the positivists for you. Still sticking to the first point in your assignment, let's now look at the interpretivists. Now, the interpretivists in many ways go very much against the positivists. The interpretivist movement as a perspective is also as a result to contradict those aspects of positivism that scholars don't agree with. So, what is it about interpretivism? Well, if you look at Tutorial Letter 101, you'll see that we give you the following about interpretivism. Interpretivists believe that individuals are not merely rational beings. Okay? We're rational, sure, but we're not merely rational beings whose behavior can be predicted and controlled. They construct a reality based on their understanding of a situation, individuals do, which is born out of their views, beliefs, and reactions to the situations and contexts they find themselves in. So the interpretivists say, sure, we're rational, logical beings, but there's much more to us than that. We can't just focus on the logical, rational aspects of any human interaction because there's emotions, beliefs, all of those aspects that actually also play into the situation. Just so, the context that we find ourselves in also has a bearing on the way that we communicate and the way that we receive communication. And I think there's a little part of each one of us, even if we are positivistic in nature, that can understand this. Sometimes when you're in a really good mood and somebody says something to you, it won't affect you as negatively as when you are in a bad mood. Right? So the context and the feelings and the subjective reality that you find yourself in actually impacts a little bit on the way that you receive and the way that you communicate. And because we are not just rational beings, we shouldn't fall into the trap of thinking that we can predict the outcomes of communication because there's so many different ways that it can play out based on the subjective reality of our receivers. Okay. Just so, as senders, we need to be sensitive to the fact that not everybody will understand a communication message as you intend it to be understood. Therefore, remember those little cogs of the positivists? We say that if we replace one receiver with another receiver, the outcome won't be the same. It's not predictable, but it's also not the same because each person is different and each one of these aspects that we introduce makes for a completely different outcome. Okay, so those are the interpretivists and that's what they believe. Also, because we're not thinking logically with a predictable outcome, we feel as interpretivists that we can't manipulate the outcome of communication. The positivists believe you can manipulate the outcome. So the way that you structure your message will have a predictable, manipulable outcome in terms of how your receiver receives it. Interpretivist says you can influence, but you can't manipulate. Okay, so that's the difference there. Now let's have a look at an advertisement that's a little bit more interpretivistic than positivistic. Now, this is also an advertisement for cough medicine, but you'll remember the first one goes, this is the problem, this is your solution. Bob's your uncle. This one goes a little bit deeper. It doesn't focus so much on the rational aspects of the receiver of the communication message. It focuses in more on the interpretivistic side of it, the feelings that are associated with this. It focuses in on mothers, okay, first of all, because they know that mothers are more often than not the people who are buying the cough syrup for their children or for their household, so they're already keeping that in mind. Secondly, they're also thinking about the way that mothers feel about getting sick. It's not, if you're sick, take this and you'll feel better. No, no. It focuses in on the fact that mothers sometimes have to continue with their work of mothering even if they're feeling ill. So they say, moms don't take sick days, moms take fix, or whatever that bottle represents. Okay, so they focus in a little bit more on the subjectiveness of being ill, of the person as a whole, not just a rational being. So it's a little bit more interpretivistic in its approach. That's my example over there. Of course, if I were to write about it in my essay, I'd unpack it a whole lot more than I did just there. All right, so that's in terms of the first part of your assignment. You have to unpack what positivism is and what interpretivism is. If I were you, I would have a quick little definition and discussion on positivism first, because technically it's easier to understand what interpretivism is once you understand what it's not, and what it's not is positivism. All right, so I would have a definition and a terse discussion on positivism, then on interpretivism, and then I'd combine the two to sort of unpack it a little bit more. Now, one thing that I have to tell you about positivism and about interpretivism as perspectives before we move on is this. The one isn't right and the other one wrong. Personally, you can sort of understand one or intuitively or intrinsically be aligned to one more than you are to the other one. But that doesn't mean the one is wrong and the other one is right. They're just different. They're perspectives. Perspectives are different ways of looking at something, right? So as perspectives, they differ. The one's not wrong and the other one right. They're just different. Okay, keep that in mind. So don't fall into the trap of sort of giving a very, very specific way of positivists were wrong because of this and this and that. That's your opinion. That's your perspective. The one isn't wrong and the other one right. Alright, so that's the first aspect that you focus on in your assignment. Let's quickly look at the second aspect that we mentioned. Now, the second aspect has to do with how interpretivism and positivism actually come together, and how they clash when they do, or how they actually merge when they do. And you can focus on both of those. Of course, most literature that you consult will look at the ways in which these two butt heads, how they are at odds with one another as perspectives. So, in a nutshell, you would talk to the following. Interpretivism looks at the existence of objective, logical, objective, empirical, social facts. Now, these facts exert its influence over individuals. Okay, so my message constructed in a specific way will exert an influence over individuals, and this influence, whatever it will be, is predictable and manipulatable. Interpretivists, on the other hand, say there is no objective facts in this world. We construct what we see as facts subjectively. Okay, any one of us who is in a relationship of one kind or another, or is married or whatever the case may be, will know that each person in any relationship can only know what they know, and they see that through a specific lens, and that lens is the lens of subjectivity. Whatever is real for you is real because you understand it in that way. So that's what the interpretivists say. They also say influence is as a result of subjective meaning and not external forces. So I will buy your cough syrup if subjectively I understood it to add benefit to my life in some way. I didn't just buy the cough syrup because you told me to, because as an external influence, you influenced me. I have to feel it in myself before I will do that. That's what the interpretivists believe. Furthermore, influence is not predictable because of the subjectivity, and therefore not manipulatable. You can influence people, but you can't manipulate them. That's what the interpretivists believe. Alright, so very important things about your discussions of both the interpretivists and the positivists that I just quickly want to touch on, if you don't mind. First of all, if you've done this subject before, you will realize that we've scaled down the amount of things that we want you to focus on in this assignment. And for those of you who are doing the assignment for a second or third or fourth time, might feel, they made it easier. Quite the contrary. We just want you to focus on two things because we want you to really focus on them deeply and really zoom in on them and get all of the juicy bits about interpretivism and positivism. We want you to really sink deep into literature in order to do so. So what I'm saying to you is, do not fall into the trap of picking the low-hanging fruit. Interpretivism is this, positivism is that. The first two sources that you find will tell you sort of what they are, and that's what you're focusing on, and you're done with your assignment. If you do that, you're not going to do really good at honors level study. We want to see that you really researched positivism and really researched interpretivism to the point of theoretical saturation. And you found out absolutely everything that's possible to be found out about these two aspects before you moved yourself to discussing them. It's only once you do that, once you really are able to sink deeply into the theory on aspects relating to your assignments, that you are actually functioning on a postgraduate or honors level study. Undergraduate, you got away with just finding the bare minimum facts. Postgraduate, we want you to dig really, really deep. Okay, so don't pick just the low-hanging fruit. Go for all of it. Secondly, we don't want to see you include irrelevant information in your assignments. What do I mean by that? Well, here's the thing. Not everything that you read on interpretivism and everything that you read on positivism will be relevant for your assignment. Why is that? Well, as I told you, positivism actually hails from the natural sciences. So there's a lot about biology and all of that that doesn't have bearing on organizational communication that you will find with relation to positivism. We don't want to hear about that, okay, because it's not relevant for your specific assignment. We want you to really focus on the relevant aspects to organizational communication context and internal communication therein, and not just the peripherally kind of related information. Really focus on only that which is relevant. If you do add in the peripherally related stuff, you're going to have a very sort of superficial assignment that has as many pages as anybody else's, but it's not that deep theoretical discussion that we expect you to forward. Okay. Also, if you include irrelevant information, it's very hard to keep your line of argumentation going because you're jumping around with facts, right? It's very hard to talk about internal organizational communication if you've got stuff about biology there or the natural sciences, whatever. That's not what we want. Also, when you talk about positivism and interpretivism, there's a whole bunch of literature that dedicates itself to research methodologies. That's not what we want here. We're not asking you to write a paper on interpretivism and positivism in the context of research and empirical research. We are asking you to write about it in the context of organizations, and that should be your focus. Just make sure you do that. All right, so that's aspect number 2. The last aspect that you will need to focus on in terms of your assignment is this. you will need to take the theoretical discussions that you have in terms of interpretivism and in terms of positivism, and you will have to make sure we know that you understand what you've read. Anybody can copy from a textbook, right? Anybody can copy what they have found on a journal article on the internet, but to showcase your understanding of this deep theory that you have just discussed, we will need to see that you can make it applicable or apply it to an organizational setting. And that's what this is all about. We need to see you show examples and applications in internal organizational communication of a interpretivistic stance and of a positivistic stance. Now, when you do this, here's the thing. Your application should be direct, evident, and sensible. What do I mean by that? Well, firstly, sensible. It can't be an application that makes absolutely no sense to the specific context that you're talking about. It still has to be very much authentic and sensible. It also has to relate to your line of argumentation and cannot contradict it. But direct and evident. You can't give an example and say, and that's positivism, but there's no real, you don't really show why you think it's positivism. Okay, it needs to be a very direct, very evident example or application. Now, here are a few examples of how we have direct and evident applications that are not removed from their theory. The first one is a very bad example. So this is a bad example. We have, in American soap opera, more marginalized characters are starting to appear, but this remains tokenism. In South Africa, some unique amnesia archetypes or myths appear. According to Kaluani, this is because of collective guilt. According to Powell, it is due to a collective effort to forget the past. So that would be the theoretical part. It talks about what the writer of this found in those sources. Then there's an application to the South African context. They say, in South African soap opera Seven Milan, the demographic statistics are adding up. South African soaps distinguish in greater numbers of social stratifications than its American counterparts. So yes, there's theory and there's application. What's the problem? It's not really clear how the application actually relates to that theory that is being discussed. So let's look at a bit of a better way of phrasing that. Here we're going to see how the application is immersed into and woven into the theoretical discussion. So we have Karen Lindsay writes that although more marginalized characters are starting to appear in American soap opera, this remains tokenism. In contrast, South African soap opera embodies some unique, inherently South African amnesia archetypes or myths. Whether this is because of collective guilt, as Kaluano would have it, or collective effort to forget the past, according to Powell, the demographic statistics are adding up and are realistic in local soap operas. Blah, 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 blah. So do you guys see how the application and the theory are interwoven and how the application is actually there to showcase an understanding of the theory and more so to build a logical line of argumentation or reasoning that you can follow. That's what we want to see from you at Honours Level Study. We want to see not only deep theory, but application that's equally deep and that showcases an understanding of the theory and forwards a specific line of argumentation. I shouldn't read your whole assignment and at the end of it go, so what? No, there should be a very specific argument that you follow throughout. That's what we want to see. Alright, so that's as long as I'm going to keep you busy for today. I really wanted to focus in on only just giving you a taste of this assignment and showing you how you should approach it, rather than giving you specific theoretical markers that you should speak to. The reason for this is you're at Honours Level Study and we're not going to give you the answers because There's no such thing as a right or a wrong answer. There's something like a substantiated and motivated piece of argumentation and unsubstantiated piece of argumentation. But the one isn't right and the other one wrong. The approach is right or wrong. So you can say whatever you think is right as long as you back it up from theory. It's that old academic rule of thumb. Don't bring it up if you can't back it up. All right, well, that's it about assignment 2. If you have any questions, as I said, you are more than welcome to contact me and I'll answer any of them for you. Please don't ask questions if you haven't done the work yet. And the work means reading. You really should take a good chunk of your time to read. That's also why at honours levels, the assignments are spaced so far apart, because the most of that time should go into reading and only a small part at the end into writing. Good luck with your assignment. I know you guys are going to do great. It's a very fun topic. I actually love the perspectives on communication. It's fascinating. And I hope you find the same. Goodbye.